There is great sorrow in my heart. That's what Paul wrote in his letter to the Romans, words that we hear this morning in our first reading. This reading really tells us of Paul's deep sensitivity that caused much suffering for Paul. He mourned the separation of the Jewish nation. We know from his writings in the Acts of the Apostles that Paul really was the first to struggle with the early church and its roots in its Jewish origins. Initially, the church coexisted in Jerusalem and adhered to much of the Jewish faith, even though it taught that Jesus had fulfilled the messianic promises made to Israel. Paul's mission to the Gentiles caused tensions within the Jerusalem church and eventually led to that resolution that we all know, to the question whether the Gentiles had to become Jews first before they could be Christians. And after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, Judaism excluded the Jesus movement, so to speak, which was becoming primarily Gentile. Paul saw the tragic break that was occurring between church and synagogue, and so we hear his grief in this first reading. Very powerful reading if you took the time to look at it. There's much sorrow in his heart. He grieves. He grieves in himself for what was happening to his own people. His grief grew to the point where he offered to exclude himself from Christ, of if only the Jewish brothers and sisters could be included in Christ's saving grace. That itself is an extraordinary statement. Yet, in fact, it brought Paul to the same self-emptying love that Jesus exemplifies in his sacrificing himself so that Israel could be saved. It's like we might say that we would be willing to change places with someone that we love if only they could be saved. It is the feeling of selfless love. Paul's words became the basis for the teaching of the Second Vatican Council, which holds that God's covenant with the Jewish people will be fulfilled along with God's covenant with Christians. The beauty of all this really is the selfless love that Jesus has for us all.